Hello and welcome to day 23. Today we'll be looking at Exodus chapter 6 through 8 and Luke chapter 23. Now in Exodus here we are getting into the core of the story of God and Moses, and God is taking some time to prepare Moses for the task of freeing the Israelites from the oppression of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. Now, in verse 9, we read that the Israelites didn't hear God's message through Moses because they were so beaten down. I think this is an important thing for us to notice because we have learned through modern psychology that a lot of people cannot meet higher level needs, such as spiritual needs, until they have had their physical needs met, such as food, shelter, and security. And I think this is what's going on here with the Israelites. They are in dire need of security and a better life because of the oppression they are feeling. And because of that, they are having a hard time connecting with God through Moses' communication. So I think this is something for us to still consider today. Sometimes when we are trying to reach out to people at a higher level, they don't always respond because they have physical needs that aren't being met. Perhaps they are significantly ill, mental illness, physical illness. Maybe they are extremely low income and have a lot of real significant stress in their life. And until those needs are met, we aren't going to be able to provide for their spiritual and emotional needs. So this reminds us that we need to be participating in justice and mercy ministry, support people in whatever physical and immediate needs they have so that they can continue to grow spiritually to maturity. I think this could be one of the reasons why the prophets and Jesus focus so much on mercy and justice and the needs of marginalized people, because we really can't connect with them until we have met those needs. Now, another confusing thing here, we talked about the confusion over the names of Zipporah's father, Moses' father-in-law, which was either Jethro or Reuel, depending on where you're reading. Another confusing thing to read as we get ready to see Moses interacting with Pharaoh is this whole thing about Pharaoh being stubborn and having a hardened heart. Now, there are some passages where it looks like Pharaoh is the stubborn one and Pharaoh has hardened his own heart. But there are definitely passages where it says that God has hardened Pharaoh's heart. This does not seem very fair. This does not feel like Pharaoh's got a chance. It's kind of like God is putting his thumb down on the scales and kind of adjusting things. And you will be talking about this a little bit more, but I think the first thing for us to consider is, what are our hearts like? Are we stubborn? Are we obstinate? Are we refusing to listen when God is speaking to us? Do we harden our own hearts? And if we are the ones hardening our hearts, then we also need to be ones to step back and loosen them and let go and be able to let God come in and speak to us. I'm not going to say that we always understand why someone's heart is hardened, and there's a couple places in the Bible outside of this story where we hear about people whose hearts have been hardened, and sometimes God is the one involving that. It does seem that in this particular story, part of the reason that Pharaoh's heart is hardened by God is so that God can show the Israelites and the Egyptians God's power. And so sometimes it is perhaps done in order to make a point for people to be able to see. Going back to the story, at this point, Moses is 80 years old and Aaron is 83. Now, a lot of the people I know who are in their 80s are not really interested in walking across the Sinai wilderness to go and free a bunch of people from an oppressive regime. But another lesson for us here is that God uses people of any age, of any talents, of any abilities. God doesn't care if you are the right person for the job. It doesn't matter if you're young or old. I mean, there are young people that were used, the Virgin Mary, Timothy, David, and there are times that God is using older people like Simon and Anna, who were waiting in the temple for the Messiah to come, and in this case, Moses and Aaron. So if we are still alive and we are breathing, then God still has a job for us to do. And no matter what our situation is, God can use us in some way, and we need to be open and available for God to reach out and let us know what we can be doing. Now we're going to get into this 10 plagues situation where Moses is going to be doing some tricks, sometimes it feels like, in front of Pharaoh as a way of encouraging Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. Now, the themes of the plagues in Jewish traditions is to glorify God. So each of them are building on a way to show God's power and glory to the Egyptians. And some people also think there are some ties between the types of the plagues and the types of gods that the Egyptians had. And so if you do some study on Egyptian gods, you might start seeing there might be some connections between some of these plagues and some of the Egyptian gods. And so in that case, some of these plagues might be a direct challenge to the limited power that the Egyptian gods had. One structural thing to think about as we get ready to talk about the plagues is that there are 10 plagues, and you could look at these as 3 triads, 3 groups of 3, and then the 10th one is the creme de la creme, the big show at the end. The first 3 triads, there are warnings. For the triads, there are warnings for the first 2 items in each triad, and then the third one, there's no warning for it. Also pay attention that the first 3 are really led by Aaron, the second 3 are led by God, and the third 3 are led by Moses. So the first one, we have the water of the Nile turning into blood. Now, it's interesting when we go through these first 3 ones that Aaron is not speaking. It's not like he's casting a spell here. He prays and let God do his thing through Aaron. In contrast, the magicians, the counselors and advisors to Pharaoh, the Pharaoh's like, hey, can you do this? They are more conjurers you could think of, and they are going to be doing spells, and they're going to be moving their hands around to try and match what God has done through Aaron. So the first thing is turning water into blood, which is a mess and a problem. The second one is a plague of frogs that leaps out and covers everything. Now, the magicians are also able to create a bunch of frogs. However, pay attention that Pharaoh is the one who then asks Aaron to get rid of the frogs. It seems the magicians can create frogs and draw them out, but the magicians cannot return the frogs to where they came from. The third of the first triad is gnats or mosquitoes or lice. We don't know exactly what this creature is that is called forth, but it's small, super annoying vermin. And again, the magicians this time are not able to replicate what Aaron has drawn out with God's power. The second triad, the first one is flies. Now, God is doing something different here. This first triad of the first 3, everyone experiences. The second triad, the second 3, only the Egyptians experience this. The Israelites do not suffer from these, but they do see them. And so they are seeing God at work, and they are seeing the power of God, and they are starting to rebuild a relationship with God. But flies come, it's only on the Israelites. It's terrible swarms of insects. And we will be going through the rest of those in tomorrow's reading. Taking a quick look at Luke chapter 23 for today's reading, verse 3, we now have Jesus before the authorities, and he's asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And his response is, "Your words, not mine." This sounds cheeky. It sounds dodgy, perhaps, that Jesus is trying to get out of answering this, but I think the wisdom here is that Jesus doesn't always engage when it's not important. Jesus realizes that there are people that he's not going to convince, he's not going to be able to communicate with, he's not going to get through to them, and he doesn't waste his time with them. And I think there's some value in this example for us, that sometimes do we engage and debate and argue and get all riled up about stuff that we really can't change. And where is the wisdom? The Serenity Prayer, St. Francis had this wisdom. Where do we find the wisdom to not move and not speak and not engage when we don't need to? So there is a time to be wise and let others' words and actions stand on their own, and we do not always have to engage. Finally, in verse 34, I want to lift up where Jesus is on the cross and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." A lot of us have heard this through Holy Week and through the Easter worship services that we have every year. And some of us take it for granted because we've heard it so often. But I was reading once about a person who had been abused, domestic violence by her father, by men in her family. And she really connected with Jesus saying this here because she felt that she was unable to forgive the people who had hurt her so traumatically in her life. And when she heard Jesus say this, she said, you know, Jesus knows what I'm going through. At the moment that Jesus is on the cross, in her view, he is at a point where he might not have the ability to forgive the people who put him on that cross in that moment. And he's turning to God the Father saying, God, this is up to you. I've gone beyond what I can do. They need to be forgiven. Please forgive them. But it's more than I can handle at the moment. And this woman really deeply connected with Jesus at this moment. And she was able to then say, God, this is beyond what I can forgive and what I can do right now. Please forgive the people who have done this to me so that I am released from this and I can move on with my life. And I thought that was just a really amazing insight into what Jesus was experiencing at this time as he was facing death, and the experience that a lot of people have who've had deeply traumatic experience in their life. There is a time and a place when forgiveness might be beyond us, but God is there ready and willing to take that on for us and take care of it for us and release us from those bonds of trauma. So if you feel a connection to Jesus at that point, feel free to do what Jesus did and just reach out and say, God, I need your help with this one. Hope this is helpful for you, and we will see you again next time.